I met Eric at a housewarming party when I was 24 and he was 28. I was standing by the kitchen island, picking pepperoni off a slice of pizza because I've always been picky about my food. When this guy walks over and says, "That's how you get a woman to marry you. Order pizza with everything so she can customize it herself." I looked up and saw this tall, lean guy with dark hair and really kind eyes, wearing a button down that was just wrinkled enough to show he wasn't trying too hard. He had this quiet confidence that was completely different from the finance bros I usually dated, the ones who talked about themselves for hours and never asked a single question about me. Eric was a mechanical engineer, which sounded boring until he started explaining what he actually did, designing systems for buildings that kept people safe, calculating loads and stresses so structures wouldn't collapse. The way he talked about it, you could tell he genuinely cared about doing good work, about making sure his calculations were perfect, because people's lives depended on them. It was refreshing, honestly. Here was someone who had actual substance, who did meaningful work instead of just pushing money around spreadsheets. We started dating that fall, and Eric turned out to be one of those people who remembered everything. He noticed I was allergic to mushrooms after I mentioned it once in passing, and from then on he always checked ingredients when we ordered food. When I told him I broke out in hives from mangoes, he actually researched which other fruits might cause similar reactions. He'd send me memes during my long work days, always perfectly timed for when I needed a laugh. When I got migraines, he'd make me tea and dim all the lights without me having to ask. My father loved Eric immediately, which was saying something because Dad had never approved of any guy I'd brought home. After Eric left from his first dinner at my parents' house, Dad pulled me aside and said, "Ash, you've got yourself a good one. Don't mess this up." Coming from a man who'd spent my entire dating history pointing out red flags in every boyfriend, this was practically a marriage endorsement. The proposal happened during a hiking trip in the Smoky Mountains that October. Eric had planned this whole elaborate day. We hiked to this overlook where you could see for miles, all these layers of mountains fading into blue-gray in the distance. He'd packed this incredible lunch and somehow managed to keep champagne cold in his backpack. When he got down on one knee, I wasn't even surprised because everything about us just felt inevitable in the best possible way. The ring was perfect, simple, classic, exactly what I would have chosen, but somehow better, because he'd picked it himself. We got married the following summer at Lake Geneva. Eric looked incredible in his navy suit, and the way he smiled when I walked down the aisle made me feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. During his vows, he promised to always remember the little things, to make me laugh when I was stressed, to be my partner in everything. I promised to support his dreams, to build a life with him, to choose him every single day. At the time, I meant every word. The first 3 years of marriage were good, really good. Eric was exactly the same person he'd been while we were dating. Consistent, thoughtful, reliable. He still made me tea for migraines, still sent funny messages during the workday, still remembered every little preference and quirk. We settled into routines that felt comfortable rather than boring. Weekend mornings in bed with coffee and crossword puzzles, trying new restaurants, visiting his family for holidays where his mom would show me photo albums and tell embarrassing stories about his childhood. But somewhere around year 3, I started feeling restless. Not unhappy exactly, just stagnant. Eric's consistency, which had been so appealing when we were dating, started feeling predictable. He'd come home from work and tell me about his day, some project involving load calculations or structural assessments, and I'd find my mind wandering. He'd suggest we try the new Italian place downtown, and I'd think about how we always tried the new places. Always split an appetizer. Always ordered wine, but never more than 2 glasses because Eric was responsible about everything. It wasn't that Eric had changed. If anything, that was the problem. He was exactly the same person I'd fallen in love with, but I'd started wanting something different. Something more exciting, more unpredictable. I felt guilty about these thoughts, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing out on something. Then I got promoted to senior project lead at the marketing firm where I'd been working for 2 years. The promotion came with a significant raise, a corner office, and a new boss named Ian, who'd been brought in from a competitor to head up our department. Ian was everything Eric wasn't: charismatic, aggressive, the type of person who commanded attention the moment he walked into a room. He was recently divorced, drove a BMW, and had this way of making everyone feel like the most interesting person in the world when he talked to them. During my first one-on-one meeting with Ian, he spent an hour asking about my background, my goals, my ideas for improving our client relationships. He actually listened to my answers, asked follow-up questions, treated my opinions like they mattered. When I mentioned some frustrations I'd had with previous management, he nodded and said, "That's exactly the kind of fresh perspective we need around here." By the end of the meeting, I felt more energized about work than I had in months. Ian started including me in high-level strategy meetings, asking for my input on major decisions, giving me opportunities to present to clients. For the first time in my career, I felt truly valued and recognized. When Eric asked about my day, I'd find myself talking more about Ian than about the actual work, how he'd complimented my presentation, how he'd asked for my opinion on a new campaign, how he'd said I had real leadership potential. The flirting started gradually. Ian would compliment my outfits, tell me I looked nice, make jokes that were just slightly inappropriate but still within professional bounds. He'd text me after hours about work stuff. But the messages would always include some personal comment, asking about my weekend plans, making observations about my interests. I told myself it was just networking, that Eric wouldn't mind me building a good relationship with my boss. After all, this was career advancement we were talking about. But I knew I was playing with fire. When Ian suggested we grab drinks after work to discuss the Morrison account, I knew it wasn't really about the Morrison account. When he started texting me during evenings and weekends, sending messages that had nothing to do with work, I knew we were crossing lines. When he told me I was brilliant and that my husband was lucky to have someone so talented and beautiful, I knew exactly what was happening. The thing is, I didn't want to stop it. For the first time in years, I felt alive, excited, desired in a way that had nothing to do with comfortable routines and predictable affection. Ian made me feel like I was more than just Eric's wife, more than someone who made coffee and listened to stories about structural engineering. He made me feel powerful and desirable and interesting. The first time anything physical happened was on a Thursday night when we'd stayed late to finish a presentation. Everyone else had gone home, and Ian suggested we order dinner to the office. He had a bottle of wine in his desk drawer, and before I knew it, we were sitting close together on his office couch, talking about everything except work. He told me about his divorce, how his ex-wife had never understood his ambition. I found myself complaining about Eric, about how he never seemed to really see me anymore, how our conversations had become routine and surface level. When Ian kissed me, I kissed him back. When he suggested we get a hotel room, I said yes. I drove home at midnight and slipped into bed next to Eric, who was fast asleep, and kissed him goodnight like nothing had happened. The affair continued for 6 months. Ian and I would find excuses to work late, to attend conferences together, to meet for client dinners that were really just us at expensive restaurants, talking and flirting and planning our next opportunity to be alone. The sex was incredible, passionate and urgent in a way that made me feel like I was starring in my own romantic movie. Ian would tell me I was amazing, that I deserved better than a boring suburban marriage, that I was meant for bigger things. At home, I became an expert at compartmentalization. I'd walk through the door and switch into wife mode, asking Eric about his day. Making dinner? Curling up next to him to watch documentaries about engineering marvels or historical architecture. I got better at seeming interested in his stories, at laughing at his jokes, at responding appropriately when he'd reach for my hand or suggest we go to bed early. The guilt was manageable because I told myself I wasn't hurting anyone. Eric didn't know, so Eric wasn't suffering. I was just taking something for myself, something I deserved. I justified it by telling myself that Eric and I had grown apart, that we wanted different things, that I was too young to settle for such a predictable life. I convinced myself that what I had with Ian was real, that it was leading somewhere meaningful. Ian talked about us traveling together, about what would happen when I finally left Eric, about the life we could build together. I started imagining a future that looked completely different from the one I'd planned at 26. But I never actually took steps to leave Eric. I liked having both, the security and stability of marriage, and the excitement and passion of the affair. I liked coming home to someone who loved me unconditionally, and I liked having someone who made me feel irresistible and powerful. I thought I was smart enough to manage both indefinitely. The night Eric found out, I'd been careless. Ian had sent me photos from a hotel room where we'd spent the afternoon, along with messages that were explicitly sexual and completely incriminating. I'd fallen asleep on the couch while Eric was in his home office working on some project, and I'd forgotten to put my phone on silent. I woke up at 3:47 a.m. to bright light in my eyes. Eric was sitting in the armchair across from me, holding my phone, scrolling through months of messages and photos. His face was completely calm, which was somehow more terrifying than if he'd been screaming. I sat up and opened my mouth to say something. What? I don't know. But Eric held up his hand to stop me. He continued reading for another few minutes while I sat there in my silk pajamas, feeling completely exposed and ridiculous. Finally, he set the phone down on the coffee table and looked at me. I hope it was worth it, he said, his voice steady and quiet. I promise you, I'll get my revenge, not with anger, with strategy. Then he stood up and walked upstairs to the guest bedroom, leaving me alone on the couch with my phone full of evidence and no idea what to do next. Eric didn't speak to me for the next 3 weeks. He slept in the guest room, left for work before I got up, came home after I'd gone to bed. When we occasionally crossed paths in the kitchen or hallway, he'd look right through me like I wasn't there. He didn't ask for explanations or details about the affair. He didn't want to know how long it had been going on or whether I loved Ian or what I was planning to do next. He just completely shut me out. I tried apologizing, tried explaining, tried getting him to engage with me at all. But Eric had apparently decided that our marriage was over and there was nothing left to discuss. The silence was worse than yelling would have been. At least anger would have meant he still cared enough to fight for us. 3 weeks after he found the messages, I came home to divorce papers on the kitchen counter. Eric was asking for nothing. No alimony, no share of my retirement accounts, no claim to the house we'd bought together. He just wanted out, as quickly and cleanly as possible. The divorce was finalized 90 days later. Eric maintained his strategic silence throughout the entire process, communicating only through his lawyer. He moved out the day after we signed the papers, taking only his personal belongings and leaving behind everything we'd accumulated together. I kept waiting for him to show some emotion, to give me some indication that our 5 years together had meant something to him. But he treated the whole thing like a business transaction. 2 months after the divorce was final, Ian and I both got called into HR for what they described as a routine discussion about workplace conduct. Apparently, someone had anonymously submitted evidence of our affair: text messages, photos, hotel receipts, security footage of us leaving the office together. The HR director explained that relationships between supervisors and direct reports violated company policy, and that conducting personal business on company time using company resources was grounds for immediate termination. Ian and I were both escorted out that afternoon with our personal belongings in cardboard boxes. As we stood in the parking garage, Ian told me he'd already had his lawyer send out feelers and expected to have interviews lined up within the week. "Don't worry," he said, kissing my forehead. "This is just a temporary setback. We'll get through this together." But Ian's confidence in us apparently didn't extend to actually supporting me through the aftermath. Within 3 weeks, he'd landed an executive position at a competitor, making even more money than he'd been making before. Within a month, he'd stopped returning my calls. When I finally reached him, he explained that his new company had a strict policy about employee relationships, and that it would be better for both of us if we kept our distance while he established himself in the new role. I spent the next 4 months applying for jobs and getting nowhere. My LinkedIn profile, which had once been full of congratulatory messages and networking requests, went completely quiet. The marketing world is smaller than people think, and word travels fast about why people get fired. I applied to over 100 positions and heard back from maybe 10. The few interviews I managed to get were clearly courtesy interviews, HR departments fulfilling their obligation to consider all candidates while having no intention of hiring someone with my reputation. Meanwhile, Eric seemed to be thriving. He'd made his social media accounts private, but I could still see him tagged in other people's photos, hiking with friends, at work happy hours, looking healthier and happier than he'd looked in years. It was like our marriage had been holding him back, and now that he was free, he was becoming the person he was meant to be. I ended up taking a studio apartment across town and living off my savings while I tried to rebuild my career. I ate a lot of ramen and spent a lot of nights alone, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The life I'd imagined with Ian, traveling together, building something meaningful, had evaporated the moment it became inconvenient for him. The security I'd taken for granted with Eric was gone forever. I'd gambled everything for 6 months of excitement, and I'd lost. The call from Layla about the IT assistant position at a logistics company came on a Tuesday morning when I was down to my last few $100s. The job paid less than half what I'd been making in marketing, and it was basically entry-level work, but it was the first real opportunity I'd had in months. "We're looking for someone who can start immediately," Layla explained during our phone interview. "The pay isn't great, but there's room for growth, and we really need someone reliable." Reliable? The word stung because I knew I'd proven myself to be the opposite of reliable. I'd thrown away a good marriage and a successful career for someone who discarded me the moment I became inconvenient. On my first day at the logistics company, my supervisor mentioned that I always seemed to be smiling. "It's nice to have someone positive on the team," she said. "A start is a start," I replied, and I meant it. Looking back now, I can see how greedy and selfish and stupid I was. I had a husband who loved me consistently and completely, who remembered every little thing that mattered to me, who would have done anything to make me happy. I had a successful career that I'd built through years of hard work. I had a comfortable life with someone who was genuinely good. Someone with integrity and kindness and all the qualities that actually matter in a partner. But I wanted more. I wanted excitement and passion and the thrill of being desired by someone new. I wanted to feel special and powerful and irresistible. I thought I was smart enough to have everything. The security of marriage and the excitement of an affair. I thought I deserved both. Eric's revenge wasn't cruel or vindictive. It was exactly what he'd promised. Strategic. He waited until our divorce was final, until I couldn't claim he was acting out of spite or trying to hurt me to gain advantage in the proceedings. Then he simply provided evidence of behavior that violated clearly stated company policies. He didn't embellish or exaggerate. He just let the truth speak for itself. The consequences I'm living with now aren't punishments Eric imposed on me. They're the natural results of my own choices. I destroyed my marriage by choosing to betray someone who trusted me completely. I destroyed my career by conducting an inappropriate relationship with my supervisor and using company resources for personal business. I destroyed my relationship with Ian by expecting him to sacrifice his career for someone he'd only been involved with for 6 months. I'm 29 years old, starting over in a job that pays barely enough to cover my rent, living alone in a studio apartment with furniture from thrift stores. Eric is thriving in ways that suggest our marriage really was holding him back, though I know that's not how he would describe it. Ian is building his new career, and probably telling his new colleagues about his crazy ex-employee who thought their affair meant something serious. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd made different choices. If I'd talked to Eric about feeling restless instead of looking for excitement elsewhere. If I'd focused on building something meaningful with the person who'd already committed to building a life with me. If I'd been grateful for consistency and kindness instead of taking them for granted while chasing drama and passion. But I can't change what I did. I can only live with the consequences and try to rebuild something from what's left. The IT job is a start. Like I told my supervisor, maybe not the start I would have chosen, but the start I've earned. Eric was right about one thing. His revenge was strategic, not emotional. He didn't destroy my life out of anger or hurt. He simply removed himself from it completely and let my own choices determine what happened next. The life I'm living now is the one I built through my decisions, my priorities, my actions. I hope it was worth it, he'd said. It wasn't, not even close.